Pro Tour Marvel superheroes came and went, and with it, we've got our modern meta breakdown. So we're going to dive in for today's episode and talk a little bit about what the top decks were featured at the event itself, as well as highlight a couple of cool, unique builds that people are going to be testing out in the coming days and weeks. So let's jump into it and see what the modern meta is all about. So going into the Pro Tour itself, you can see the breakdown of decks here. This is, of course, as everyone expected. We talked about it leading up to it. The number one decks going into it, Boros Energy there, Izzet Affinity. The two decks that kind of tied for the most registered decks, as well as the largest percentage of the field. Broodscale Combo coming in right behind it there, 42 decks registered, 11% of the field. Eldrazi Tron, 9%. Esper Goryo's 9%. Amulet Titan, about 6.9 there, same as Izzet Prowess, both sitting there with 25 decks. Ruby Storm 16, Simic Neoform 14, Eldrazi Ramp 12, Esper Blink 11, and then the 57 other decks that were registered there. So we're kind of going to go through and talk a little bit about the different decks that you guys can see in Modern, as well as kind of what's going on when it comes to, you know, here are the top decks, everything that was played, because there was what was the total number? 34 different decks. And this is from the one of singleton decks that people played, that like specific brews that we'll be talking about, like the Song of Creation list. There was a blue-white or Azorius Loki deck. There was Devoted Druid combo, some different Metalcraft stuff. There was Izzet Wizards players, things like that. There was a Death Shadow player that was running around, all the way up to kind of the most popular. Now, we have Esper Blink as the cutoff there. The one right below it with 9 decks registered was Boros Land Destruction, Domain Zoo, Jeskai Control, Blue-White Control, Living End, and then 3 Jund Cosmogoyf, 2 Blue-White Blink, 2 Hollow One, Golgari Yawgmoth, Reanimator, and so on and so forth. Like, there was a, you know, seeing so many different decks, 34 different decks, really is the big showcasing of why Modern is so diverse and so cool of a format, because yes, these are the best decks and you should have your sideboard geared to battle against these decks. You know, especially if you go to your local shop, you're going to tier and adjust your sideboard accordingly. But this is a good snapshot of saying these are what you should expect to see if you go to play at an RC, if you're going to a larger event, if you're going to play in one of those big side events at a MagicCon. You know, this is the stuff that you can expect to see. So let's take a look and see what some of the win rates are for some of these decks before we dive into some of the actual deck list here. So here is the actual conversion win rate. So this is the craziness to be able to see, is most of these lists are below 50% win rate. Now, you can look and see, okay, Esper Blink, 49%, all the other fields about 49%, even the energies and stuff like that, which was the lowest. Part of that is the amount of decks that were running it, right? Or amount of players that were running. 46 players were running both Boros Energy and Izzet Affinity, and that percentage-wise of win rates are just like, you know, slightly lower there. I think the big things to note, though, are the combo decks in particular, right? Seeing at that Broodscale Combo, 51%, just that slight edge up there. Simic Neoform, another very fast combo deck, you know, 60%. Was able to win there. The Eldrazi Ramp sitting at 60%. I think that's a big part in because of the tools that it has at its disposal, being able to get access to like Malevolent Rumble, being access to the Kozilek's Command, things like that, you know, definitely help it to kind of edge out a little bit more. It has a little bit more interactive tools that it can be able to use against certain decks compared to something like the Eldrazi Tron list, which is a little bit more fragile if it fights up against maybe one of those 9 players that's running the Boros Land Destruction list or things like that. You know, like there's definitely some weaknesses that exist within all of these decks that you can be able to exploit and find ways to be able to fight over them. And that's where the sideboard and stuff comes in. But we're not going to spend as much time talking as sideboard side of things as much as we are going to be talking about very specific decks in the meta itself. So we'll kind of dive in and we'll highlight a couple of these different decks here, do little short snapshots. We'll do, of course, some of the big main powerhouses that you can see on this list. Let's go take a look at the, of course, number 1 and number 2 decks in the modern meta, which is Boros Energy and Izzet Affinity. Deck number 1 that we're going to talk about is the most popular deck in Modern, the one that you're going to see the most of if you go to events, and that is Boros Energy here. So there is basically a stock list, but there's a few flex spots within the list that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about what the deck's trying to do and kind of go through things as we highlight each of the decks in Modern from the kind of Pro Tour, at least the top 12, 11 most popular decks. We're going to spend another day talking about some of the other outliers because there's so many cool decks in Modern here. But let's talk about Boros Energy here. You know, the energy package is still alive and well with things like Guide of Souls. You get to be able to utilize that energy to help you gain life, to help you get a little bit more evasive with your creatures there. The life gain is perfect to synergize with Ocelot Pride here. This build in particular I wanted to highlight because of the flex spots that it's got, being able to get a few more toolboxy cards. It is a little bit more all in on utilizing Guide of Souls, Ocelot Pride, and getting those online as fast as possible. So supporting that, we've got our Guided by Light here, which is whenever this or another creature or artifact you control enters, gain 1 life. In the beginning of the end step, draw a card if you gain 3 or more life this turn. It also has the warp mechanic on it, but the idea of gaining a bunch of life and just sort of snowballing with this deck is kind of the name of the game, especially because we are running Ranger Captain of Eos here to be able to find our 1-drop. So that's Guide of Souls, that's Ocelot Pride here. That's kind of our big, utilizing this package to help us run away with the game and snowball our opponents. Now, Ranger Captain also has a little bit more of a safety net involved with it because you can sack this and your opponent can't cast non-creature spells this turn. So in a field where you're expecting, maybe a little bit more of the storm side of things, you can just sort of blanket and stop them of going, oh, okay, you're going to cast your Pass in Flames now, or you're going to try to storm off. I'm going to sack this and stop you. All right. But in addition to this sort of extra protection and extra focus on Guide of Souls and Ocelot Prides, we still have other tools to kind of go about it because, of course, Ragavan also is a 1-drop. So basically gives us options to be able to get any and tutor up any of those 1-drops here. But this also runs a 1 of Solitude in here. The real big powerhouse with this deck, of course, is the Ajani. You're able to kind of flip it and be able to dome people, especially with the way that you have your red permanents, which, Goblin Bombardment is here. Blood Moon is in the main board. Legend of Roku is also in here. So this is kind of like what enchantments can we have to help us out. There are some flex spots in how many you're going to run in the list, but that is something to kind of consider here. Now, bolts, Galvanic Discharges are removal. Thraben Charm also added in removal, and just sort of stock list when it comes to lands. Your sideboard is kind of tooled to deal with a lot of the different difficult matchups that exist out there, but you can kind of see this is a lot of what you're going to expect to see if you're utilizing white in your list to be able to help you. Clarion Conquer, amazing. Wrath of Skies, amazing. Celestial Purge, right? High Noon. The kind of shore up our weaknesses against certain decks here. And then, of course, the Eldrazi list, we've got like our Obsidian Charmal to help us out, but like you have all these tools against like the Prowess players, the Storm players to kind of help us out. This is very a useful tool against anybody that is doing Planeswalker stuff, so any control types of shells, you like to bring this in, even against some of the Tron lists to kind of help slow them down a bit because they are going to be tending to utilize artifacts to help them ramp, as well as being able to utilize their Planeswalkers abilities, so that is very nice and very helpful there. So a lot of cool tools in the Boros list. Let's jump over and talk about the other most popular list from the event, which is Izzet Affinity. Let's talk about the big man Kappa. So Kappa Cannoneer deck, the best Kappa Cannoneer deck in Modern is the Izzet Affinity list. If you're not familiar with Affinity, you are all about dropping a bunch of low-cost artifacts out and kind of swarming the board. You have kind of 2 strategies that you go for. A go wide strategy utilizing Pinnacle Emissary, where you kind of swarm the board with a lot of drones, or you have your Pierce strategy utilizing something like Kappa Cannoneer to kind of get in and put a lot of pressure on your opponent early because of the evasiveness and unblockableness that Kappa Cannoneer gets, but also continuing to grow by the more artifacts that are entering. Now, the 0 cost, you can see it is full of it. right? Claws of Gix, explosive, engineer explosive, Mishra's Bauble, Mocked Opal, right? Welding Jar, Tormod's Crypt. You're basically just going to be dropping your hand down. If you've been seeing any of the legacy gameplay that we've been doing, you know it's very similar to a Fantastic Car strategy of I'm just going to dump my hand, and you can either utilize Pinnacle Emissary, dump my hand into that, or dump my hand and play a Kappa Cannoneer. We've also got a powerful enchantment known as Weapons Manufacturing here. So every time that we're having a non-token artifact enter, we create a munitions token, which when it leaves, you get to deal 2 damage to any target. So oftentimes you can have that clear the board, kill someone's powerful creature, or just go face with it. Things like Claws of Gix helps us pop those, Engineer Explosives helps us pop those, and then Arcbound Ravager is another one to be able to sacrifice it and grow our creature that way. So a lot of cool elements the way the deck is set up. It is very fast, very aggressive here. You can kind of see the tools that it's got at its disposal, utilizing a very quick mana base. Urza Saga also extremely powerful for being able to do what it needs to do. Sideboard side, we of course have some like mirror matchup stuff with like Hurkyl's Recall and things like that. Dampening Sphere to help us against some of those big mana decks, some of those Prowess decks, the Storm decks, things like that. Vexing Bauble, really powerful. Creature decks, what we saw our #1 deck in the Modern with Boros Energy, well tied with Affinity here. So Whip Flare, really good for that. A little bit of Galvanic Discharge. Mystical Dispute, a little bit more counter and control elements to go with it. Even the Blood Moon here. Of course, if Blood Moon is on out when we have our Urza Saga on 2, that does get to stay. So that is one nice little element that we get to utilize here. So very cool, very powerful deck. It is an expensive one because of Mox Opal, really. The rest of the list is relatively cheap in comparison here, but wanted to show off this one as our next most popular list because it was tied with Boros Energy and Izzet Affinity. But let's jump over to the Broodscale deck and see what that list is all about. Broodscale Combo, the 3rd most popular deck registered at Pro Tour Marvel Superheroes here. Now, we've seen this on the channel a couple of times. If you're not familiar with the way the deck works, it is a 2-card combo utilizing Basking Broodscale and our equipment Blade of the Blood Chief here. So whenever a creature you control dies, you put a +1 counter on equipped creature. So the way that it works out is whenever 1 or more +1 counters are put on Basking Broodscale, you create an Eldrazi spawn. You are able to generate essentially infinite colorless mana off of this because you're sacrificing the spawns. Oh, a creature died. Basking Broodscale triggers, make another spawn. Boom, 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 boom. Now, utilizing things like Glaring Fleshraker, we're just able to shred our opponent because whenever another colorless creature enters, we're going to be shredding our opponent here. So that's Basking Broodscale will trigger. Boom, Glaring Fleshraker triggers, and it just go. We can also utilize it to cast like an Emrakul here. All right, big Emrakul Promise End. That's one way. Also, some lists are running Walking Ballista. This list is not. There are some flex spots, depending on how you want to run it. Like the Dismember is a big one that you'll see some of the lists run. They might run some red removal in place of it. It just depends on how you're going to be going about it. Like Unholy Heat is often seen in this slot here, but for the most part, this is a stock list, right? We're utilizing basically creatures to kind of get us set up for the combo and kind of go from there here. But you got a lot of tools to help you there, utilizing Pithing Needle, Vexing Baubles, things like that to help you survive to get to these later stages. Urza Saga is in this list for like a plan B, plan C, but also to tutor up things like Blade of the Blood Chief and stuff like that. So yeah, the idea of it is you are able to get your equipment out, get the Basking Broodscale, and kind of go. But you can kind of play a little bit of a grindy game, and it doesn't have to necessarily just be all in on it. But sometimes Modern is very focused on how quickly can I assemble my combo. So we're looking at some ways to kind of get there. Ancient Stirrings, Malevolent Rumble, things like that to help us dig for these combo pieces that we might need. Like we have the Blade, but we don't have a Basking Broodscale, so we need to be able to find it. So, that's the way the deck works. It's very fast. Very powerful. You can even see with the sideboard tools that it's got available to it to sort of like a little bit more. Okay, we've got some removal, some anti-graveyard stuff here. even the Sire of 7 Death is really nice for a little bit more survivability. The lifelink can be really, really helpful here. But even just having some lands in the sideboard, like Cavern or Gemstone Cavern there, to have this kind of accelerate us out on when we're on the play in game number 2 or 3 potentially there. So deck is very fast, very powerful. You're looking for a combo deck. This is definitely one to consider when you're playing Modern. Continue on with our Eldrazi adventures with kind of the stock list of Eldrazi Tron or Tron in general, right? This is the flexibility. There are some flex spots within the list that we'll talk about. Sometimes players are going to be running Thought Knot Seers in the main board. Sometimes they're in the sideboard. Sometimes they don't even run them all together. But here is at least a good enough breakdown of what you can expect to see. How much more control-y elements you want to run in the main board is definitely a potential. Like, do you want to have, you know, the Torpor Orbs and the Trinispheres main board or not, and how many of those, because that's where those kind of Thought Knot Seers spots tend to take up. But the way that this list is built is it was kind of designed to help it deal with a lot more of the creature strategies here, right? All is Dust is here. The Torpor Orbs, we're expecting some like Goryos, we're expecting some Blink strategies, and we want to put a stop to the ETB elements that are going to be coming about that. Also, Disruptor Flute, very powerful to kind of disrupt what your opponent's game plan is, whether if they're going for a combo piece or something like that, or just trying to play a consistent strategy and you're like, nope, I'm going to get in there and make that cost a little bit more, or shut off your activated abilities. But you know, Tron is all about that 1+1+1 equals 7, you know, mine, power plant, and tower. All of those together get you 7 mana. We've got the Labyrinth that we can be able to pitch our Ugins, our Sires, our Devourers, even this All is Dust, and get it back later, but get us 2 extra mana. The Eldrazi Temple, basically able to cast all the big scary stuff that our deck wants to be able to do. So let's talk a little bit about the Planeswalkers real quick, and then we'll get into the sideboard because it is a toolbox deck, so it does care about the toolbox side of things. But Kozilek's Command is MVP of this list. It is powerful early, it's powerful late, it does all the things we want it to do. It can ramp, it can get rid of your graveyard, it can draw our cards, it can exile a pesky creature. Like, it does so much heavy lifting in any of the Eldrazi or any of the Tron-based shells that exist. So definitely something you have to keep in mind here. But our Planeswalkers here, the new Ugin, I say new, you know, the 7-drop Ugin, the best Ugin in existence here, has the triggered ability on cast. Not only when you are casting Ugin, but also when you cast another colorless spell, you get to start exiling and popping your opponent's pesky colored permanents there, and it's very quickly to ultimate. If you've never played against it, right, it starts with 7 in loyalty, +2, you gain 3 life, draw a card, 0, get 3 colorless mana, and -11, go search for all of the colorless permanents that you might want and be able to cast them for the price of for free. So that is very scary and very quickly able to take over the game. The other side of things is Karn the Great Creator. This is kind of the, you know, basically since this card has been released, Tron has been running it. All right, it's been utilizing a toolbox sideboard because it says activated abilities of artifacts your opponent control can't be activated, which is really good in the mirror matchup against an Affinity player, things like that you can kind of have this blanket protection going. But also we get to do this -2 ability and go into our sideboard. And this is the toolboxy element of it, right? You see 15 cards, and every single card in here is something that we can be able to grab off of our Karn, right? What do we need for this specific matchup here? Do we need some Chalice? Well, there's 2 of them here. Right? Do we need to bring back our own lands? Okay, cool. Well, I've got a Crucible of Worlds. We can play our lands from our graveyard here, right? Do I need to keep myself alive to drag this game out a little bit longer? Well, I've got an Ensnaring Bridge, right? So there's all these little tool elements here. If we've got a bunch of mana and we need a finisher, guess what? You've got Cityscape Leveler here. We've got our Extinguisher Battleship here. We can also just go disruptive elements, right? We can go for the Liquid Metal Coating and start turning your lands into artifacts. Now you can't use them. All right, and then I can uptick Karn and destroy your lands because it is a 0-cost artifact. It will then just die. All right, so the idea of a toolbox deck is super cool, super powerful. It makes sense why it is one of the most popular and brought about decks for the Pro Tour because it's just so good. Right, it's just the consistency, just middle of the road. It just does well. Right, it has a little bit of weaknesses, of course, to like the Ponza list that exists, but that wasn't even in the top 11 decks that were there. It still did go. Players did play it. We're not going to talk about that today. But yeah, if you're looking for an artifact toolbox deck, big mana deck, this is the best big mana deck in Modern here. But let's go and take a look at some of those combo-y decks, the faster decks, ones that might care about their graveyard, with our Esper's Goryo's deck next. Let's talk about the best graveyard reanimation deck in Modern, and that is Goryo's Vengeance here. This cares about putting your legendary creatures into the graveyard and reanimating them utilizing Goryo's Vengeance. Of course, the creatures we're talking about are Traxa, Grand Unifier, and Grizzlebrand. Those are the two big ones. We also have Superior Spider-Man to help us also bring things back at that little ETB elements of it off of like Atraxa. But Atraxa is the biggest one, so let's talk and break that down real quick as we get into what exactly we're going to be utilizing to get these creatures into the graveyard. So Atraxa, Grand Unifier here, Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, and Lifelink. That's all well and good, especially because it's a 7/7 for 7 mana. We're never going to pay the 7 mana. I mean, we could. We have the mana in here, and we have the right tools to be able to get hard cast it if we wanted to, but that's not our goal. We're going to cheat it in there for 2 mana here. But the real thing we care about is this ETB that goes along with it. When it enters the battlefield, reel the top 10 cards of your library, and then you get to pick each different type. Right, so you got to basically go, I need 1 sorcery, I need 1 instant, 1 creature, 1 land, 1 artifact, 1 enchantment, right? And just sort of pick and choose what tools that you need to help you kind of succeed in the matchup. You're able to keep these creatures around, of course, because Goryo's Vengeance is a return target legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, gains haste, exile at the beginning of the next end step. So if you do it on your opponent's end step, this will last during your turn. All right, so you can think about it that way. But in order to keep it around, we have things like our Ephemerate here. So I could Atraxa, bring that back off of Goryo's Vengeance, Ephemerate it, keep it around. Also, we've got our Solitude package here. Solitude's in here to be able to help answer some pesky things, but also to be able to ephemerate. Same thing with Quantum Riddler. We can ephemerate those as well. So that's kind of your plan B, plan C. I've got powerful creatures, but also I have this reanimation strategy that I can go by, and you can kind of pivot in between two. We've got some disruptions to help us out here. Pest Control kind of helps us out to deal with the 1 mana or less, which we looked at the Boros Energy list, and, you know, Ragavans, Oscillate Prides, Guide of Souls, all these 1 mana stuff, get rid of them. Don't want to have to deal with it. Or it's a white card that we can pitch to Solitude. We've also got Prismatic Ending, Thoughtseize, kind of disrupt the battlefield, disrupt your hand a bit, and then a little bit more of our protection to help us out with Spell Snare, Force Negations, things like that. Especially if we try to go for Goryo's Vengeance on your turn, that's where our Force Negation comes online and is able to help us out here. Now, in order to put these scary creatures like Grizzlebrand, like Atraxa, into the graveyard, we need some discard outlets. So we can utilize our Thoughtseize to target ourselves to pitch something. We can also utilize Faithful Mending, gain 2 life, draw 2 cards, discard 2 cards, and it's a white card, so it pitches to Solitude. It's a blue card. It pitches a Force Negation. So really, really powerful and useful tools to kind of help us out here. Stock list when it comes to the lands, as you might imagine, we've got a couple of Surveil lands, 3 to be exact here when you're running a 3-color list, and one that cares about the graveyard. This is perfect, right? So that is one thing to be able to know. A lot of lists aren't running 3, but when it comes to Goryo's, that's the way to kind of go about it here. Now, sideboard gets a little bit more control-y and a little bit more powerful in that regard of kind of protection-oriented. Mystical Dispute, Spell Snares, Strict Serenade, Surgicals, Extractions, more Thoughtseize, Celestial Purge for the mirror matchup here to kind of exile and get rid of some pesky things. Wrath of Skies to help us against some of those aggro strategies, also some of those affinity-based decks we can kind of deal with, and Consign to Memory, a 4 of stock to help us deal with Eldrazi, help us deal with some of the annoying kind of colorless stuff that exists in Modern here. But if you're looking for an Esper's list that cares about the graveyard, this is definitely the most powerful and the best way to go about it. So make sure you guys are prepared with some graveyard hate in your board if you're not running this list. Even without Lotus Bloom, we get to see Amulet Titan as one of the top decks in Modern here. Now, as you might imagine, if you are familiar with the lines and the way that it works, you're able to kind of grind through it and do very, very well. It still cares about the Aftermath Analyst loops, if you will, but not to the same extent. The deck has been in Modern forever, right? It's been around. It's had little like bans here and there, right? This is just the most recent one that took place for it. we've had bans all the way back in like 2015 with like Summer Bloom being banned, and the deck has refused to die. And part of that is in part because of the Amulet of Vigor itself being able to facilitate this idea of all of these tap lands that you would have, these bounce lands, right? Gruul Turf, Simic, Growth Chamber, things like that. Basically, the whole deck is full of tap lands, right? Crumbling Visage, you know, all of these, even like a Mirror Pool, right? Amulet of Vigor helps us to be able to have those enter untapped. We also have Spelunking as well, which does the same thing, but it is an enchantment and allows us to play a land from our hand, like draw a card and put a land from our hand in the battlefield. They don't work together though. You can't like stack it. It's like one or the other. So you can't have an amulet and a Spelunking and double up. You have to have two amulets, right, or two Spelunkings, like, because they are both replacement effects. So they don't. It's weird. But the way the deck works is it cares about getting an amulet out, getting a Spelunking out, utilizing a Primeval Titan because of the ETB and attack trigger. ETB, you get to go tutor for 2 lands, put them onto the battlefield. They would normally enter tapped, but guess what? Amulet of Vigor or Spelunking prevents that from happening. We also have ways to get a bunch of lands off things like Scape Shift. We could sack a bunch of our lands, go get more lands, right? Kind of just keep cycling through and filling up our graveyard for our eventual Aftermath Analyst. Cultivator Colossus is also a great way to be a finisher, but also kind of swarm the board with all these lands because we're playing these bounce lands. So we have to return a land to our hand. So this is where Cultivator comes in because when it enters, you get to put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. If you do, draw a card and repeat this process. So very, very scary. Also, it's a trampled power and toughness equal number of lands you control. And that's where, you know, Aftermath Analysts pay, of course, 4 mana, sack it, return all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield. There's ways to fight over that, but that's the big part of it. And then with things like Shifting Woodlands, you know, there's ways to be able to bring back things that might have died already or you've interacted with the Aftermath Analyst. Well, guess what? I brought it back again. We'll just kind of loop through it again. And you're able to kind of close out the game because of the battlements, Hanowar battlements there. Pay 1 red, target creature gains haste until the end of the turn. So you're able to sit here and go, all right, I finally got to my Cultivator Colossus. I've got my Titan out, and now I'm going to go. This deck is very fast and very explosive. It can win very, very quickly here. You know, you've got ways to kind of help you ramp and accelerate. Green Sun Zenith not only can get you like an Arboreal Grazer early, but it can also find you Aftermath Analyst. It can find you a Primeval Titan. It could even get up to the Colossal if you have so much mana that you are able to generate there. So it is very scary and very explosive, and you have to have ways to kind of disrupt it and try to fight over these tools, right? Amulet of Vigor, the Spelunking, things like that is definitely going to be useful and helpful. Now, the sideboard you see is going to be, what do I need to fight against, right? Trinisphere, I'm not really going to be casting that much stuff that is going to be less than 3 mana, so I'm going to slow you down. Collector Oof is in here. Force of Vigor is in here for some anti-artifact stuff. You see Dismembers and Fire Spouts in here for some creature removal, so definitely really cool. And you see it tends to have some like toolboxy lands in the sideboard as well. So definitely a very powerful deck and something that if you go to bigger tournaments, you're going to be seeing sitting across from you there. So be prepared to figure out how you need to set up your sideboard to deal with it, how you need to kind of navigate it and practice the matchup to find a way to disrupt their loops there. But let's jump in and take a look at some of those faster decks like Izzet Prowess, Ruby Storm coming up next. Speed's the name of the game here with Izzet Prowess. Now, there are a few flex spots within this list, whether or not you want to run Boomerang Basics or if you want to run the Storm Chaser's Talent, those could be one. So let's talk a little bit about what those do. But a lot of lists are just running like 2 of each just to kind of help us out and be able to have a little bit more ways to close out the game because it is a very all-in strategy and you're depleting so much of your resources to try to end your opponent quickly enough, and sometimes they find a way to just barely survive and now you're in scramble mode and go, well, I'm now depleted, and you're able to start running away with the game. So let's talk about what the deck does and how you can expect to be fighting against it or piloting it if you decide to use the Prowess list. So Of course, Monetary Swift Spear is a great turn 1 play if we don't have Storm Chaser's Talent. Of course, Monetary Swift Spear, that 1/2 haste and prowess there for 1 red. Very, very powerful. Very quick to get out the gate quickly. Dragon Rage Chandler is another one of our 1-drops that we've got because of the Surveil. It helps us fill up and turns on our Delirium for maybe like Violent Urge later on in the game to give us a little bit more of our double strike elements to kind of really close out the game. But also the evasiveness that comes with it of being able to fly. All right. If you have Delirium, this is now a 3/3 with Flyer. So those are our kind of our 1-drop. Storm Chaser's Talent creates that 1/1 blue-red otter with Prowess. So a little bit of way to kind of help us continually spread out our threats, because we can go wide or pierce. Very similar to the idea of the Affinity list of you have this go wide element of making a lot of tokens, things with Storm Chaser's Talent, bouncing it back with Boomerang Basics, and then replaying it, but also Corey Steelcutter. Right? I get to be able to sit here and continually trigger this and make a lot of monks that are going to go wide and just going to swing in with a lot of 1/1 prowess creatures. Corey Steelcutter also allows us to be able to equip onto something, give it haste, but for the most part, we are just going to be trying to trigger this as much as possible and go wide and be able to take them out. But the pierce element is definitely there with things like Violent Urge, Mutagenic Growth, especially if you're like, okay, I'll block this one, you'll block that, cool, this one got through, I'm going to now Mutagenic it, I'm going to Violent Urge it, and really pump it and push in and try to take you out. Slick Shot Show Off works very well for that pierce style of it. It's got flying, it's got haste, and it has this ability to get 2 power off of every non-creature spell. Compared to the Prowess, which is normally +1/+1, this definitely aligns with that pierce strategy that we're going for here. But yeah, the idea of the deck is you're very explosive, very quick to get out the gate. Mishra's Bauble, Preordains, Expressive Iterations are there to help us kind of refuel on our tools a little bit more. But for the most part, it's just kind of turn the creature sideways, go, go, go. Lava Darts to be flashback from our graveyard to try to put in a little bit of extra damage, put in some extra prowess triggers going off here. 4 bolts are in here, and it is low to the ground. Only 18 lands here. But being Izzet, you can see what it's got available to it. I love the idea of having the Assault Strobe. Personally, I am a big fan of the 61 card special and run the Assault Strobe main board in mine. And that frees up another slot for me in the sideboard here. But this is kind of what you can expect. Consign to Memories in here, right? We know that's going to be a big part. I love this and the festivities here, dealing 1 damage to each opponent and each creature or planeswalker they control to kind of, oh, you're building a bunch of cats? Well, let's wipe all those cats out of here. Meltdown for artifacts, Spell Pierce for a little bit of protection and disruption against some of those combo players. Same thing with Spell Snare there. Tormod's Crypt for the anti-graveyard stuff, and then Unholy Heat for a little bit more removals to help us out, especially because we can get that Delirium going there. But very quick, very aggressive deck that can kind of pivot onto 2 different axes there, so be prepared for the speed that this deck has. But another deck that is very fast coming up is the Ruby Storm here, which, 16 players registered it at the event. So let's hop over and take a look about what Ruby Storm has in store for us. I'm seeing a lot of fast decks, Amulet Titan, Izzet Prowess, and now Ruby Storm, a deck that can win as fast as turn 2. Let's talk about what this deck can do and how you might have to try to navigate it in this specific matchup where these important points. Now, there are, again, a couple flex spots. I wanted to highlight this list. Again, all of these decks that we're showing on the video today are from the Pro Tour that pros were piloting at the event. But the specific cards here, Price of Freedom is a really interesting one here. So let's highlight this before we get too deep into it. Now, you're probably familiar with this card if you have seen the Boros Ponza list, the Boros land destruction list that exists. It's 1 in a red, destroy target artifact or land an opponent controls. Its controller may search the library for a basic land card, put it in the battlefield, tap. You also get to draw a card afterward. So it does have that little bit of added bonus to help us disrupt maybe a Tron list, things like that, deal with some pesky artifacts that exist. So I like this idea of having that toolbox card in there, but not all the lists are running it main board. You have to sacrifice something in order to make room for that, and this looks like we're sacrificing at least one of our wish spells to be able to do that, because sometimes the list will run like 3 wish cards, 1 extra on the board, stuff like that, and different tools. So like definitely something to note there. But let's talk about what you're trying to do. The goal of the deck is to be able to cast as many cards as possible in a turn and then storm off with a payout card. That would be something like Grape Shot, deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So that be able to get a high enough count. We've got some stuff in our sideboard here, like Stormscale Scion. Every now and again, you'll see some goblins get created, but this list is not running them, so we're not going to highlight that at this moment in time. In order to do that, we need our cost reductions, right? Ral Monsoon Mage, as well as Ruby Medallion are those two that we need to be able to focus on here. Now, this, of course, makes all of our red spells cost 1 less, and you see an entire list of red spells. So that makes this very easy in turning all of these 2-drops into a basically 1-drop. That's why you see a lot of spell snares also running around in a lot of people's boards, because the 2-drops are so important and so impactful, like Ruby Medallion and Ral Monsoon Mage. So being able to stop those is very important. Now, also, Ral has this flip ability here. So let's talk a little bit more about this, because you can win the game off of this alone. It's powerful enough that if you are starting to spin your wheels and you're missing out and they've disrupted you somehow, right? Maybe they've answered your Past in Flames, which is a very good part for you to be able to target if you're trying to fight against them, utilizing things like surgical extractions and stuff like that, right? So, of course, gives all the instants and sorceries in your graveyard flashback. Normally costs 4 mana. If it's in your graveyard, it costs 5 mana. Of course, that gets reduced to 3 and 4 based off of your Rals, based off your Ruby Medallions, things like that. So that is definitely something to be able to know. You know, I just noticed also that this list is not running any artist talents. That's another one of those flex spots players are run. I like artist talent a lot. It helps us kind of go through our list a little bit more, but this list is not. So just, you know, make a note of that. But let's get back to Ral Monsoon Mage. So we know about its cost reduction here. The other side of it, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you flip a coin, roll a dice, evens, odds, whatever you're doing, right? You're going to take damage if you are losing that flip. If you win the flip, you may exile it, because it's a may ability. You can set up and go, all right, my first couple ones, I'm not going to flip it, and hope on my later ones I'll flip, because when you do transform, Ral does get extra loyalty equal to the number of instants and sorceries. And your goal is to get at least 6 extra counters on him so you can be able to ultimate him. All right, that's the big part of it. If you can ultimate him, great, you can run away with things, because you got to exile the top 8 cards of your library, and you may cast those cards, specifically the instants and sorceries, from among them without paying their mana value. And you can basically just reset things. Oh, you've disrupted my Past in Flames line. I'm going to go for the raw line here. So these are those like definitely important pivotal points to be able to keep an eye on. Ral Monsoon Mage, Past in Flames. Now, this is also, let's talk about how we're going to kind of spin our wheels and get to those points. We've got a lot of mana generation here. Desperate Ritual, Pyretic Ritual. Both of these are 2 mana spells that generate 3 red. Okay, we get that. Manamorphose here, basically replacing itself. You draw a card when you cast it, you generate 2 mana, and we're going to be picking usually double red. Sometimes we pick red and white based off of what our sideboard looks like and the tools that we've got available to us there. But, you know, that's kind of our way. We're going to be doing a lot of our exiling here, right? Ren's Resolve, there's a 4 of in here that's going to be exiling top 2. Play those until your next turn. Same thing with Reckless Impulse, exile top 2, play those cards, cool. But this one is only until the end of turn. Ren's Resolve lets us go a turn later. Then we've got our newest addition, which is Hex Magic. 2 and a red. So a little bit more expensive, but it is so good because exile all cards from your hand, then draw that many cards. Until the end of turn, you can play all the cards exiled. So if you have a grip full here, let's going to be resetting it, and now I've got 7 new cards, or let's say 4 new cards, 2 new cards, and 2 cards in exile, getting a hand of 4. Like, there's so many different interactions you can do and set yourself up with more information. The more information you get, the better decisions you can make in the game there. So Hex Magic, great addition to the list. Of course, Wish is in here for us to wish for a win. We talk about toolboxy sideboard stuff. This does get us access to this outside of Grape Shot in the main board. We also have a Grape Shot in the board, as well as a couple other tools, right? We could wish for a Past in Flames to finish going off. We can wish for a Silence to stop our opponent from disrupting us so we can finish going off, right? So a lot of cool tools to help us out outside of just sort of like, oh, I need some removal, wear and tear, right? I need a Brotherhood's End, right? Things like that you can be able to help us out. I like this idea of the Galvanic Relay. Exile top card of your library during your next turn. You can play that card. And it's got Storm, so great setup here to help us out. So very cool, very fast deck, can win as early as turn 2. So you have to be ready to disrupt it. Graveyard Hate is definitely the easiest way to do it, or ways to answer Ral before he can flip. So be prepared for that. We've got, of course, 3 more lists to talk about. We've got Simic Neoform, Eldrazi Ramp, and Esper Blink. So let's tab over and take a look at another fast deck known as Neoform. We're interrupting our gameplay to let you know about our new affiliate with NerdGear. nerdgear.gg/nanman will take you directly to the website, and as you can see, they've got a bunch of awesome gaming accessories, from playmats, life counters with the life tracks, playmat holders, and more. So make sure you do some browsing on the site, find some goodies, and then use the code NGNanman for 5% off your entire order. But let's get back to our gameplay. Right. Simic Neoform. We've seen Neoform a couple of times on the channel as well, so you can check out those decks. But the other deck besides Ruby Storm, besides Amulet, that can win on turn 2, it would be Neoform. Now, the idea of the deck is you are going to be cheating out an Allosaurus Rider, right? I'm going to get rid of 2 green cards in my hand, play this for the price of for free. Then I'm going to turn it into something big and scary. I'm going to utilize this Neoform. I'm going to use this Eldritch Evolution here, and I'm going to be able to try to OTK you. There's a way you could be able to do that utilizing Galta. All right, it's a 12/12 with trample. When it enters the battlefield, you may put any number of creature cards from your hand on the battlefield. Well, there just so happens to be a scary creature known as Xenagos, God of Revels here. This is a 6/5 indestructible, right? It's basically a legendary enchantment god. We don't care about it being able to become a creature, because we only care about that extra ability at the bottom. It says, the beginning of combat of your turn, another target creature you control gets haste and +X/+X until the end of turn, where X is that creature's power. So how does 24 trample haste damage sound off of Galta on turn 3, turn 2, right? You can go crazy with this. So very, very powerful. Now, it does have some cool pivot points, right? There is a little bit of toolboxiness depending on how you go about it, right? The Neoform gets it +1, so you find an 8-drop here. Right, so there is a couple of ways that we can be able to find some really good 8-drops to help us out depending on how things work out. If I'm playing against maybe an Esper Blink list, or a list that cares a lot about Solitude to save them, I have our Ureni the Song Unending here. So this is a 10/10 flying protection from white and from black, and when it enters, it deals damage. X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers your opponent control, where X is the number of lands you control. Most of the time, you're doing like 2-3 damage. That part we don't really care about so much as the pro white, and you have a 10/10. So you go, okay, turn sideways, here's 10 damage. You're at 10, assuming you haven't fetched and shocked up to this point. Guess you have 1 turn to answer this, and oh wait, your answer is a Solitude? That doesn't do anything, so I guess I win. All right, it's really cool, really powerful in the way that it can set it up. But it also has the Atraxa elements of it, Grizzlebrand in here as well, so you can kind of go into these sort of pivot modes of go, I can play grindy. I don't just have to go for a combo to be able to beat you. I'll get out an Atraxa early, and now I can be able to sit here and refill my hand and be able to go again later on and utilize the lifelink, utilize the death touch, and try to disrupt you and go about and get these tools to help me out that I might need, things like an endurance, things like a wistfulness here. All right, so very, very cool. Also, we could just go and play a Hooting Mandrills if you've been able to answer a lot of my stuff early on, right? Then you get to be able to set yourself up and just kind of go, well, here's a 4/4 trample. I'm just going to slowly beat you with this until I can assemble more and more tools, because it is very easy to disrupt it if you have the right stuff, but you have to have the right stuff, right? These are the cards that you need to be able to try to fight over. Eldritch Evolution, Neoform. So how are we going to have to be able to protect ourselves? Well, this is the whole thing, all right? We've got Veil of Summer. This is amazing. Spells you control can't be countered this turn. Cool. You would try to counter my Neoform, my Eldritch Revolution? No, you're not. All right. I've also got Pact of Negation. I'm trying to win this one turn. This is how we're going to do it. All right. Trying to save myself here. The person who won the Pro Tour was piloting a Neoform list this time around. So definitely something to consider when you're looking at decks to be able to go for as fast combo decks. This is really, really good. Nourishing Shoal, Planar Genesis here. A little bit of toolbox elements here. Nourishing Shoal, very, very good for pitching something like the Discipline of Disciple of the Frailise. Be able to gain a bunch of life. We could be able to pitch something else like an Allosaurus Rider if we really wanted to. Most likely we're not going to pitch the Allosaurus Rider though, because we want to be able to Neoform those or Eldritch Evolution. Planar Genesis helps us ramp, get a land or something that we might need. Maybe we need an extra green card. Maybe we need a little bit of, we're looking for Xenagos to help us finish and get the Ghalta Xenagos combo going. So Planar Genesis, green and a blue. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. Put a land card from among them on the battlefield tapped. If you don't, put a card from among them into your hand. So very, very useful. Summoner's Pact to help us find what we need. Again, that's a lot of what it is. So very, very low to the ground. 15 lands here. 18 with the MDFC, of course. The Disciple of the Frailise is count in there, as well as the Bridgeworks battle there to help us get a little bit of battling. But sideboard is, again, we got kind of ways to help us protect ourselves, disrupt our opponent. That's kind of the way to go about it. I love the idea of running Elish Norn in the sideboard here. If you're playing against a deck like the Boros Energy list or the Affinity list or something like that, that you're like, oh, they're going to be playing a lot of creatures, I have a way to kind of help me deal with this. Right, this is very useful. I wouldn't even mind bringing it in against the Prowess list, to be honest, because of the creation of all the monk tokens or the creation of being able to set themselves up with the otters. So definitely something to consider with the way the sideboard is set up. Is kind of, how am I going to protect myself? How am I going to manage to get a powerful creature out to help me win in specific matchups. So if you like a fast deck, check this one out. But we've got 2 more to highlight here in this video. Classic Eldrazi Tron, or Tron in general, is not your style of play. Let's just ramp into some big scary monsters with basically a mono green list here. So if you're not familiar with this ramp version, this was featured with 12 different decks, about 3% of the field, but definitely something to consider when you're going to be going and playing events, because of just the ability to accelerate is crazy with this list. So let's talk about what the deck is trying to do. We can already see some of the big scary monsters that it's got. Of course, 2 Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger at 10/10. Of course, for 10 mana, but whenever you cast it, exile 2 target permanents, it's indestructible, and then when it attacks, exile the top 20 cards of your opponent's library. Good way to close out the game. We've talked about Emrakul before, but Emrakul the Promise End, 13/13. We get to be able to take control of our opponent. Great card here. So that's kind of our big payout cards that we've got. How are we going to utilize it? How are we going to cheat them into play? All right, we've also got Ugin in here to help us out. But the idea of this list, as you can see, it's sort of 18 lands, not a lot to be able to ramp, but that's where this fight rigging comes in. Hideaway 5, right? 2 and a green, Hideaway 5. So you get to look at the top 5 cards, pick a card, exile it face down underneath fight rigging. Everything else goes away. The beginning of combat of your turn, put a +1 counter on target creature you control. Then, if you control a creature with power 7 or greater, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. We just so happen to have some creatures that have 7 power, or close to it, right? Drowner of Truth is a good one here. Whenever you cast a spell, if colorless mana was spent to cast it, create 2 Eldrazi spawns, so a little bit of ramp. But also, it's got that 7 power, right? For 7 mana, pretty good, especially when we have things like Eldrazi Temples to help us kind of ramp it out a little bit earlier. The other big one is this Slumbering Trudge. If you're like, I have never heard of this card before, and that would make sense because it's not something that you would normally think of in a competitive 60 card deck because it costs 49 cents. But here's how this works. X and a green. We don't really care about the X cost because the way it works is this creature enters with a number of stun counters on it equal to 3 minus X. And it's stunned. The thing we care about is it being a 6/6 for 1 green mana. Because guess what? Main phase 1, play this Slumbering Trudge. Here's a 6/6. Cool, he's stunned. Guess what? I move to combat, put a +1 counter. He now has 7 power. I can now cast this Ulamog that I had underneath of this. I can now cast this Emrakul that I have underneath this. All right, I can now cast this Ugin that I have underneath this. So it is really crazy how you can kind of set yourself up. All right, the idea is you're going to be ramping out. You're going to get Sowing Mycospawn to help you get more lands, Fanatic of Rowanus to generate a lot of more mana. All right, Green Sun Zenith is going to help us because we can be able to go Green Suns for 1 and find the Slumbering Trudge. That's crazy. All right, Malevolent Rumble to help us set up. Kozilek's Command, we talked about how good this card does. It is MVP. I think it was the most played card or most registered card at the event because basically if you have access to this, you're running 4 of. Any Eldrazi list is running 4 of. Doesn't matter if it's Tron, doesn't matter if it's Eldrazi Tron, doesn't matter if it's this ramp list right here, right? They were running 4 of for it. It's so good. So this is a very cool deck to test out. We'll probably do some of it on the channel at some point here. But yeah, 12 different players registered this for the event here. Sideboard stuff, as you might imagine, we've got some disruptions against some of those lower cost stuff. There's a lot of those fast 1-drop stuff. So we bring in a bunch of Chalice and say, Chalice on 1. I'm going to try to shut down a lot of what you're doing, especially against those people that are doing like Consigned to Memories and things like that to help disrupt us. Trinisphere is really good here. Force of Vigor is amazing. Anti-graveyard stuff going with Endurance. Thought Knot, Seer for disruption. So very cool ramp strategy to keep an eye out for if you're going to be playing some leagues as well as playing in bigger events. But we've got Esper Blink to wrap up the video. So let's jump over and take a look at the Esper Blink list. Y'all know that I've been playing a lot of Blink myself, and we have actually 2 Blink lists to show off today because a lot of the lists for the most part that we've talked about up to this point have been pretty stock, right? They've been, okay, we've got like 3 or 4, maybe 5 flex spots within it, but the Esper Blink list really is pivoted into 2 different axes, if you will. You have the more control-y style that we're showing off first, and then you have the more heavy creature style that we'll show off second. So I am playing more of the control-y style of it, so let's talk about this. The idea of the Blink strategy is still the same. You're utilizing quick Quantum Riddlers, you're utilizing Solitudes, you're relying on Ephemerates to keep them around. This list has shaved on Felia. I don't necessarily agree with that. I'm still running Felia in mine, but the pro that played this at the event decided no Felia. We'll talk about why. And a lot of it is the sorceries, the instants, the tools that we've got available to it. Very disruptive focus, right? 4 of Thoughtseize here, 2 Inquisitions, 2 Pest Controls, right? We're just going to kind of clear up the board as much as possible and get away with utilizing Psychic Frog, Quantum Riddler, Solitudes to kind of close out the game here. Also got Prismatic Ending to help us with some removal along with Path, March of the Otherworldly Light, and then a little bit of the protection with Spell Snare, Force of Negation. It serves protection / disruption, right? It goes on both sides of it there. So yeah, your idea is you're going to be dropping down a frog early, set yourself up with a turn 1 Preordain, Inquisition, Thoughtseize, something like that, and just sort of go, right? We're utilizing 2 Teferi in here to help us out, shut down some of the stuff our opponent can do, and that's kind of the way you're doing it. I love this sideboard. I did want to highlight there are 2 Geist of St. Trask in this list. I mean, when's the last time you saw that in Modern? I've been seeing a couple of lists testing out even in like Legacy, which is crazy to think about, but I love seeing the Geist in here. But the rest of it is very control-y, as you might imagine. Even this Fracturing Gust here, right? It's 2 hybrid, but you're going to pay 3 white, right? So 5 mana, but you're going to destroy all artifacts and enchantments and gain 2 life for each permanent destroyed this way. If you go, I have a hard time dealing with Kappa. How do I deal with Kappa if I can survive long enough? 5 mana, wipe the board, right? It is a little bit more control-y, 22 lands, right? Instead of like some of the lower, we've been seeing a lot of these like 18 land decks for a little while here. So, but Consigned to Memory, Rest in Peace, Surgical, Anti-Graveyard stuff, we've got a lot of tools to kind of help us out. But yeah, this is one avenue of it. Let's go take a look at the creature side because I think that is also important to look at here. Also running Teferi, that's what you should be if you're on the Esper list. But this list should look a little bit more familiar if you kind of think about the Esper Blink list. For a lot of players, they think about, oh yeah, you're running Felia, you're running Riddlers here. you're running like the Emperor Bones, Overlord of the Balemark package. You're running Flicker Wisp, right? This is what we think of when we think of like almost like a stock list that exists. But I think there is something in between both that we're starting to see players test out and try to find a home for. But Overlord of the Balemark is a really good card. Basically, we're trying to set ourselves up. Turn 2, we're playing Felia on our opponent's turn. On our turn 3, we're going to be playing Quantum Riddler, we're going to be playing Overlord of the Balemark, and we're going to be able to flicker it with Felia and go. All right, Overlord is really great because of the impending cost. Normally it costs 5 mana. It's a 5/5, but the impending makes it cost 1 and a black, enters as an enchantment, and we slowly tick down that impending, right? Or impending the doom. But whenever it enters or attacks, mill 4 cards, and you can return a non-avatar creature. So you cannot return Overlord. You cannot return Aang. There's no Aangs in the list. But you would return something else, another one of your creatures, or a Planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. So you can return Teferi if you wanted to. Usually we're returning things like Solitudes, right? Or Flicker Wisp, or, you know, things like that to help us out. We could keep some in there because maybe we have an Emperor that we're going to follow it up with, right? So the idea is to set ourselves up like this, and then Felia will flicker it, keep it around. Nice little ETB going on there. Riddler help us draw cards. The way things work out with our instants, of course, Ephemerate is in here. We want to be able to keep our Solitudes. We want to be able to keep our Riddlers. We can also use it to maybe protect ourselves. You're targeting my Felia. I'll blink it instead, so it's no longer a target. All right, Fatal Push is here because there's a lot of low-to-the-ground creatures we got to deal with. Thoughtseize for Disruption, a Singleton Prismatic Ending. So yeah, very cool, very powerful list. Different ways to kind of go about it. Pretty much stock when it comes to the sideboard. Big fan of Clarion Conqueror. I've talked about it in other lists. High Noon is great. Can't cast more than 1 spell. A little bit more disruptions that are here. A little bit more removal. Wrath of Skies of a 3-of. Consign as a 3-of there. And Mystical Dispute. So definitely 2 different avenues to go about it. But that is the 11 most popular list for the Pro Tour. We'll have another video coming up in the future to show off some of the other kind of highlights from the event, because there was plenty of other decks that players ran that was like 10 or less players were piloting this list here. But so if you like this video, make sure you guys are following along as we go through. Mondays is our Modern action. Thursdays is our Legacy action. And we're going to be able to continue bringing you guys all the fun Modern and Legacy coverage here on the channel. But that's going to do it for us here today. Thanks so much for tuning in and watching, all, and I'll see you all next game.